Our philosophy is to keep things simple, minimal, and usable. And I want to touch on that usability perspective. So what does it mean to be usable? I think what they're trying to encompass with that statement is really a single point to every application. It's not explicitly said here, but when you start using the tools, the majority of the tools are intended to be daisy chained. And you can see this in sort of the concept of tabbed and surf. So if you want, surf is a single page browser with no URL bar. But if you want a URL bar, you can use dmenu for the URL bar. And if you want to use tabs, you can use tabbed for creating different instances of surf. So this sort of single-use, minimalistic approach to programs is something I feel is kind of lost at the moment in terms of the web in particular, which is where I have the most knowledge. But the web is sort of seeping into desktop technology with things like Electron. So what you'll see is a lot of programs try and do everything. Most recently, if you look at something like Notion, maybe Notion's a bad example, but something like ClickUp or Taskle, they try and be every single configuration of everything at one time. And what ends up happening is you just get enough for everything, but to get like a better experience, just using two programs will be much better than trying to shoehorn everything into one program. What I was trying to say is that with the simpler mindset, it makes it, when you have a program like Taskle, you can't really compose that with anything else because there's so many aspects to connect and it's already so complicated, right? So my outlook is a little bit different to theirs, and I agree a lot with what they're saying. I'm going to jump over to this website. I think is very funny. I'm not sure it's by the same people, but by similar people, and it makes a lot of very interesting points about the web. My favorite is the quote. Let me find it. Yeah. So the name of the website is "This is a mother website," and it's like this is what an actual website is meant to be. It's kind of the idea. But obviously the web has shifted away from this sort of article delivery system. But yeah, I love this quote here. It says, you think your 40-pound jQuery file with 83 plugins gives IE7 a boner because it can finally do box shadow. Wrong, mother effer. Please. Right? I think that's a fantastic quote with what's my opinion of what's currently happening in the industry, where there's this sort of mentality, and I've seen it in real projects as well, mentality where a developer will rather add a library which they don't fully understand, and in some cases is worse, but because it's a well-maintained open source library, they would rather add it and then remove it later if it's not used, in inverted commas, remove it later, which of course is never controlled and they never do. But that mentality is like, let's just add everything and then we'll sculpt it later by removing things. It's I think it's a very dangerous mindset, and you can clearly see in today's web that there is quite a lot of bloat, and I think quite a lot of the bloat is because of that mentality. If you just said, hey, maybe let's not use this library, let's just use a regular object, or hey, let's use CSS animations instead of a huge animation library, I think you could save quite a lot of bloat, and as this website actually points out, also accessibility. Adding accessibility through because this website here, this Mother Open website, is responsive and blind accessible, disability accessible, just because it's so simple. So I think I don't want to sound like an old man, a grumpy old man, but I think, when you try and do huge, elaborate sequences on the internet, you do also suffer some of the drawbacks of doing that. So the outlook I'm trying to follow is to not do such crazy, outlandish sequences, because to be really, really fair, the majority of programs that everyone uses every day don't do those experiences. If you go to Instagram, you go to Amazon, you go to Netflix, they don't have whooshing animations everywhere. They don't have ridiculously huge things. They have very basic UI, almost to the point of this. Maybe a little bit more than this, of course, but very, very basic UI. And they don't go crazy with that sort of stuff. So I really want to pare down and have that same really simple methodology that suckless has. And so I made these two libraries recently, which sort of fit in with that. Juro, and I don't have the title card, but Obake. I'll do a separate video on Obake. This one I wanted to touch on Juro, because it's sort of I guess an internal step for myself in why I made this as opposed to the library I already had. So I already had a library called Fairybread, and Fairybread let me do JSS animations, and I mentioned I have a nice article on Medium about the JSS animations and why I did that. But Juro is moving more towards that sort of suckless, composable library perspective. Fairybread just does styles, and it does styles in a very predictable way in the JSS sphere. But Juro is really basic. Honestly, read it. It's not complicated. You're probably like, why did you make this? And the reason I made it is because I had a problem I wanted to solve, and it wasn't a complicated problem. So when it comes to functional components, right? You've got something like emotion. If you're not familiar with emotion, link will be in the description. I'll just do a quick on the web. Emotion here, right? And emotion is a performant, flexible CSS in JS library. So it does a lot of things related to React and CSS props, style components. Right, again, it does lots and lots of things to try and fit every single possible situation. It's got these nested selectors, it's got media queries, it's got composition, it's got crazy amount of stuff. when really when you think about it, CSS is strings. CSS has always been strings. It's just strings. Always strings. And I don't know why everyone wants to make this crazily complicated with like crazy nesting and stuff. It's strings. So you have a beautiful language. Arguably beautiful language, JavaScript, which can manipulate strings perfectly fine. So if you manipulate strings in JavaScript, you can make, if you want to make UIDs, if you want to make unique IDs, get a library to make unique IDs and then put it in your string. It's not that complicated. You don't need a library which handles putting in the unique strings, nesting selectors. If you have a function that returns the CSS, you've already got the nested selectors. It's done. You don't need to create a system that copies a already flawed system like Sass or less to try and produce the CSS in the end, because this will produce the same CSS in the end. It has to, because that's how CSS works. I mean, the difference was going to be so arguably small between something like Juro, which does almost nothing, and something like Emotion, which tries to do everything. So I'm going to jump back to Juro and we'll do a quick just a rundown. If you're not familiar with the library, the link will be in the description. Juro is a registry for strings. A registry for tags, sorry, not strings. Well, kind of both. Yeah. You have a key. You set the key, which is the ID that's going to be registered in the database. We're going to run it. Let me just run it real quick in the terminal. I'm going to go to my terminal thing. There we go. Close the windows. It's going to nope. I'm going to use now serve. Grab our window. Go over to our web. So we got Juro here. And if I go add node, it goes black. If I go remove node, it goes back to white. Pretty easy to follow. Pretty noticeable difference. If I go to my head here and I go add, you can see it's added the string, the style tag with a data ID. And that's all Juro does. You put a key, which is the ID that's there, the tag that you want to render, and the text string you want to be inside that tag. I mean, that could be empty if you really wanted to, but by default it's there. And the reason I built this was so if I had a functional component and I wanted to add styles to the DOM only once, I would know that it was rendered, and it hadn't been removed, and I could render it in an appropriate way, which seems nice for the component. And that was really it. I didn't want to make it too complicated. Fairbread lets you manage style sheets and lets you interact with style sheets, and it's really this sort of mentality to. I mean, I can go there too. very So this is Fairbread. It lets you take control of a global style sheet or a scope style sheet. So both of them, and it generates an ID for you, and you can do scope styles in a nice functional way, which is, I mean, it's great if that's what you need, and it's a semi-popular library. I haven't done any updates in a while, but the reason I made Juro is because 99% of the time I didn't use any of that stuff when I was making functional components. I just had some CSS that I didn't really want a scope style tag with, because once I make a CSS for a component, I want it to be reusable for every component that I use that in. There isn't that many times when I have a component that I want it to look different than when I rendered it. And if I did, I could again put in a Juro function to add those styles to the DOM when the first of those functional components was rendered. So that's general breakdown of Juro and why I built it. And Abake, which means ghost. Yeah, not familiar with Japanese. Sort of fits into the same category. So an example of something like Abake, I was building a game to like a match game, right? And what I wanted was a state that listened to the updates, so then I could update Phaser, which is a JavaScript game library. And Phaser, I think it had its own state system, but I was also trying to use React for my button. I think I was using React or Stoneboard. I was using external buttons from Phaser, and I found these proxies, and proxies let you wrap an object, and then you can add listeners to when that object changes. What does that mean? That means that it's very, very easy to listen to a function updating, and that's what I put into Abake. I put proxies with promises, so then it updates at the correct time. So Abake has nothing to do with any sort of view layer. It's completely just an object you can listen to. So if you wanted your view layer to be canvas, if you wanted your view layer to be WebGL, it could be anything. It doesn't have to be any. It could be jQuery. It could be anything. Any sort of view layer that you wanted could listen to Abake, because it's just a function. It's just, you just pass in a function, and so Abake doesn't have a lot of those tools like that Redux does, or React does with the Chrome extensions and the action names and all that stuff. Like Abake has action names, and if you really, really wanted to, you could put a function to listen to the state renders, and then you'd have your own debugger in like 5 seconds. If you wanted to export that to Chrome, very easy. You could just set that up. Not difficult, because it follows that single purpose methodology, where you just do one thing, and that's what you focus on. So that was my big rant on suckless and Juro and Abake. I'm gonna include the latest update for Juro. It's not released to npm because it has breaking changes, but The main difference was I wanted to move Juro from a CSS only library, which I had before, to a tag agnostic library, where you can read that code and enjoy. I hope you like it. Like we do every video, Jane Wani, and have a good day.